The fact is that Bernie Sanders underperformed. I think he, relative to the final polling, I think he underperformed a bit. I think he underperformed insofar as the standards in which we have been, or at least I have been, assessing his candidacy, in that he is supposedly bringing out new voters that who are low propensity voters, who by definition of being low propensity would be less likely to be polled or considered in the polls as a likely voter. Nevertheless, the flatness of this race, the parity that exists, and because Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar have not literally, but about as close as you can get to literally no support in the African-American community, maybe a little bit more, but not much more in the Latino community. Now, that could change. I feel like it could particularly change in Klobuchar's instance for the time being, but I don't think it's going to change dramatically. So it really is tough to predict what's going to happen at this point. I would imagine that Joe Biden is out of the race by the time we get to Super Tuesday. Elizabeth Warren, I think she's going to wait to see how she does in Nevada. We will talk a little bit about that in a bit, because certainly the culinary union went at Sanders much harder than Warren, although they credit both of them with supporting Medicare for all. They are more concerned about Sanders, it seems like. But we will get to that in a bit. Sanders dominated in the youth vote. The turnout numbers were higher than 2008, or at least comparable. However, I don't know how that rates with the increase in population. And, it has been 12 years. One would anticipate a higher population, particularly in a state like New Hampshire, where one gets the sense that more people are pouring into the state.
Well, you really know how to suck the joy out of a victory, Sam.
Well, I mean, I think people should be happy about it, but I don't think anybody should be overly confident by any stretch. There's going to have to be a lot of work to do. Bernie Sanders is going to have to win in Nevada. If Bernie Sanders does not win in Nevada and do quite well in South Carolina, it's going to make Super Tuesday even that much more tenuous.
It's like calibrating the message, because Bernie supporters can't be, naive, and there's a lot that needs to be done, and the margins need to be bigger. And then at the same time, of course, we have to push back against the, corporate press that is going to literally pretend he didn't actually win.
Yeah,
that's the sort of dual track we have to figure out.
I mean, it turned out about how I thought it would when I was like, oh, I'm watching what's happening in Iowa. It seems pretty messed up. And, the polls were looking good for New Hampshire, but you can't take anything for granted. And I went and I brought 3 people with me, because I was like, every vote counts in this primary. And it turns out we were right.
Yep.
Did you see what I just sent you for later too?
Right. Talking about Bloomberg's.
We want Biden to stay in, folks.
And
well, yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the longer folks like Buttigieg and Klobuchar, and I'm convinced even Warren and Biden stay in, the stronger the chances are for Sanders. I'm not convinced that Warren's support, as everybody else is, that those 9 points that she got in New Hampshire, if she hadn't already bled those off to Bernie Sanders.
However, did you look at those numbers in the Politico piece? Her vote is coming from people who self-identify as liberal. She did terribly with moderates and conservatives. So the extent it's a genuine ideological thing, it would go to Sanders.
It's quite conceivable. And so, nevertheless, the idea here is to have as many of the not Sanders candidates in the race, splitting the race. And each one you would want to have an opportunity to pick up the delegates and deny their compatriots the delegates. So we'll see. But all this is going to come down. We're going to go through Nevada. I would anticipate Sanders placing in the top 2 in Nevada. I would anticipate him placing in the top 2 or 3 in South Carolina. And then it's on to Super Tuesday, where, we're still too far out to have a sense of this race changing quite considerably.
And you know what else? He needs to win by enough that the DNC can't pull any funny business at the convention.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know what that means, really, but
things that are allowed based on the rules, and possibly things that are not allowed based on the rules.
Right.
I just want to say that's why I would. I mean, first of all, this is another ridiculous media bias. Bernie said 1 million times he'll support the nominee. I want to start asking the other candidates: will you support the vote lead? Will you support the person who has the most votes, regardless of what the rules are? Mm-hmm. That's what I want to have the other candidates asked.
Yeah, I mean, the way the convention works is after the first round. It's sort of not unlike the delegate, like the Iowa.
No, I understand that, but I think we need to go whatever the technicalities are. I would be willing. We need to say, will you support who the vote lead is? That's what I think, regardless of what the rules are. One person, one vote determines the nomination.
But how do you look back on the race in 2016? At one point, right? Hillary Clinton, because she had 4 million more votes than Sanders did. At one point, probably in early spring, there was just simply not enough votes out there for him ever to have achieved more votes than her.
Sure.
And so...
what does this have to do with what I'm saying?
Well, that would argue then he should have dropped out at that point, because based upon the principle
sure, I don't, and
now,
that's, well, let me first of all say I don't think that that's relevant, because we're talking about now. But I will say, if you want to go back into the future, but I mean, if you want to go into the past, I mean, I didn't say please drop out, Bernie, but some people were trying to get super delegates to flip for him. I never said that they should do that. I think even though the thumbs were on the scales for her, and that matters, one of the big things about the legitimacy of 2016 is that she amassed more votes than him. And as much as I loathe her, and as much as I thought that was a mistake, that was the bottom line. You better believe if Bernie Sanders had 1 more vote than she did in 2016, I would have been there protesting.
Of course.
So to me, it's about the actual legitimacy, and I actually think 1 person, 1 vote is the legitimacy, and that is actually part of the reason in 2016 that I didn't and Matt didn't go along with some of the Bernie arguments, because at the end of the day, for all of the BS, she had 4 million more votes. I think that matters.
And if we trust these delegates to, like, okay, maybe they can make the decision for themselves and not pick Bernie because they think the people that put them in that position want them to pick Klobuchar or whatever, right? Well, then let's hear that. Let's elaborate that for the people who are going to continue to vote for you in these primaries, and let's hear that. I'm interested to hear their rationale for that.
Wait, say again?
Like, if you are going to go for a candidate that isn't Bernie, like, go against the votes, because I think Bernie will have the most votes when all this is said and done.
I would imagine at this point, I mean, it looks like it, but assuming yes.
So if you want to support one of the candidates that isn't Bernie, basically, I want to hear the rationale for why you want to do that. And if it's because you think your supporters would want you to not throw your support behind Bernie, like, they should know that that's the assumption you're operating under as a candidate.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that, when you're talking like Buttigieg and Klobuchar and Biden, to a large extent, a lot of them are voting against, in some fashion, Bernie. But I guess, if you're saying that Buttigieg should come out now and say that if I get to the,
I think it becomes more relevant as Bernie racks up the votes.
And you see,
we want to make sure that they're not voting against their own constituents when you look at who the superdelegates are supporting.
Well, forget the superdelegates for a moment, because I don't think, that's a separate question.
David Plouffe said the other day, if we go against, I believe it was either the delegate lead or the popular vote lead, that will cause irreparable damage to the party. And I agree.
The superdelegates.
My understanding was any scenario, including superdelegates, where the person who goes into the convention leading does not become the nominee, that's going to be a serious problem.
I think that's true.
So
but there's a
that's
very big difference in my mind between, let's say you go into the convention and Pete Buttigieg has, I don't know, 100,000 less votes than Bernie Sanders. And Amy Klobuchar comes in with like, I don't know, 1 million less or 2 million less votes than Bernie Sanders. But Klobuchar throws her delegates to Pete Buttigieg. 100,000 difference. That's different in my mind than the super delegates coming in and changing the outcome of the vote.
Well, the super delegates, I mean, that is absolutely an escalation, of course.
Right.
That's a whole other level.
But in the scenario I'm talking about, forget the super delegates for a moment. In terms of like Amy Klobuchar,
I'm holding the position that the person with the vote and delegate lead should be the nomination. It should be the nominee, period. And that all candidates should commit to that course of action. And I feel totally comfortable with that, regardless of the technicalities. And the clear difference.
It's not technicality.
Yeah,
it's
that's
the rules that have always been
democracy
part of it.
on the level that most people understand democracy.
That's what
except for like what we have with electoral college,
which we have all opposed to, I thought.
Yeah,
So
but
again,
I mean,
if we're going, I'm going by my metric. If you just want to know my metric, is that in 2016, the reason that I wouldn't, I already said this, I wouldn't ride that hard on certain things because Hillary Clinton actually did have 4 million more votes. If Bernie Sanders comes in with 5,000 more votes, he should be the nominee, period.
All
and
right.
frankly, I would,
Yeah. Ask everyone if they'll commit to that. And if they won't, say why not.
They'll say, because I'm committing to the rules that when I entered the campaign that were explicit.
Okay,
and
allow
well,
me to
go sell that to the
We think
country.
that's
Well,
garbage.
I'm just, that's what I would say.
People will think that is garbage.
Yeah, that won't resonate.
That
with
the
normal
rules
people.
say I can throw my support behind Buttigieg instead of Bernie.
Of course.
Yeah, but that's not that interesting. I want to hear them say that.
Right.
Yeah, make
and
them
also
say
that
it.
won't resonate.
I
That won't
think they
resonate with
could
normal
say.
people,
I mean,
though.
if you say like, what would you be your justification for giving your delegates to the second place finisher in the second round of voting? You would say like, well, that's what the whole convention's for.
But what about them? That do you like that overrides Bernie's lead in votes?
Oh,
I'd be curious
you
to see
could
that
say
elaborated.
I think that Pete Buttigieg has a better chance of winning. And that's what the convention, that's the rules of the convention that were stated when we all entered into this campaign. Everybody knew them. They were explicit. Everybody who voted, certainly if they took the time to learn, it's not like these.
Well,
then
we
I would
know
ask
that
to
the
see
voters
some
don't
polls.
do the time to do that. So
I mean, I
that's
could
why
just say
I would
there's
ask
no
them to
way
prove
in
it.
the summer that I'm going to be making arguments like this. I'm going to be
well, I know.
arguing,
I'm just.
I mean, sure, no, I know that they'll say that. I don't think those things will particularly resonate with people. And I also would say, too, that in terms of reality, if you actually do that, Bernie or bust will become a real thing. And it will actually be pretty disastrous.
I agree with all that. And I think, I would be shocked if there wasn't, particularly if the vote count was, obviously larger. I mean, if it's, you're talking a couple thousand votes, it's unlikely that it would even be remotely that close. But I think that is, it seems to me that's a perfectly rational thing for them to say. Now, I think people have to assess when they get in there if that's going to actually lead to a victory. I suspect that it would not. I think that you'd end up, fracturing the party and people would be pissed.
And then that gets to the other part of the question, which is what is the difference inside the party and within these people, frankly, between people who are well to the right and don't like Bernie and everything, but really do want to defeat Trump. And I think a chunk of people who are absolutely comfortable, they would certainly prefer to see Trump return to power than Bernie get anywhere near power. And that's the other,
I think there are also, though, people who legitimately feel that Bernie Sanders is going to lose 40 states.
Well, once we get to the point, though, where it becomes very clear that if they do that, they will lose by 40 states for sure because of how many people they're pissing off. That, then we'll see. Like James Carville, I actually take it as word that at the end of the day will support Bernie Sanders because he opposed Donald Trump for all he's running his mouth. Someone like Hillary Clinton, I think in the privacy of the ballot would pick Donald Trump over Bernie Sanders.
Absolutely.
So that's the distinction I'm drawing. And I think that, there's definitely people who think to themselves, absolutely, I'd prefer Bernie Sanders to lose to Donald Trump or to alienate those people because my contracts won't get affected and I can actually spin him losing in a way that will prop my own career. And I think there's other people who are totally freaked out and at the end of the day do want to remove Trump and they'll support Bernie.
I think the most important takeaway here is we cannot get discouraged. We need to stay focused right now. If Bernie doesn't have enough delegates to win it outright, they're going to try some stuff at the convention. We cannot trust these other candidates to support the person with the most votes. Like you said, they'll have lots of arguments for why it's a fine thing to do to support the candidate with the second most votes or whatever. We need to win by enough so that this stuff cannot happen. And the way to do that right now is to keep on knocking on people's doors, sending texts, showing up, and not throwing up your hands and saying, oh, well, it's not fair. He can't win. It doesn't matter.
100%.
Right.
Also threatening people on Twitter.
Like,
that's a fucking
what they
good
want
point.
you to do.
Exactly.
Get in their mentions. Stay relentless.
Oh, God. Did you guys see that SNL this past week where they portrayed Bernie as just like the head of a troll army?
What is...
No.
Just a
It's
couple
really
more
infuriating.
stats. Just a couple more stats. 57% of voters on Tuesday were female. That was up from 2 points in 2016. A majority of voters were college graduates, 53%. Liberal or somewhat liberal, self-described, 60%. Their three big issues were healthcare, climate change, and income inequality. A big majority supported single payer, 61%.
That's like the get rid of private insurance, like full on single payer, right? The way they worded that, I think, was pretty.
Yeah, but I mean, they
Eliminate private
like,
insurance.
how do you justify supporting two candidates out of that 61%?
This is why I think it's useful for them to say why they wouldn't support Bernie when he wins all the votes.
And also why Pete lying about it might be having more of a positive effect on a broader range of voters than we think.
I wonder, I mean, has Klobuchar? I mean, maybe she didn't get any of those people. I would like to see those crosstabs on there. But, what's interesting is that when you hear those, right, they're, and I think 40% of the electorate, if I remember correctly from the stat I saw, was incomes over 100%. And, 100,000. I think it was something like 30% was 50,000 to 100,000, and 30% were under 50,000. So your PMCs, is that what they are?
Professional managerial class.
Yeah, the PMCs apparently there's more of them than those other. I mean, I guess it depends on how you want to divvy up those things. In New Hampshire, PMCs are pretty important apparently. To woo. I mean, it's surprising because when you hear those numbers, right? 57% were women, 53% college graduates, 60% liberal or somewhat liberal, healthcare, climate change, income inequality, single payer. They sound, and those 100,000 plus at 40% sound like Warren voters. Right? I mean, theoretically, but not last night. The percentage of young voters declined from 2016 to 2020 from 19% in 2016 to 14%.
Is that's a turnout thing, or what do you think's going on there?
I don't know. I mean, look, in 2016, it could be that there were just more older people just as a percentage, because you had, I don't know the actual raw numbers of whether, but that 5 percentage points seems high. And at the very least, younger people did not come out despite the strokes.
Bye-bye.
Bang Bart, loving Sam's demoralizing Gen X cynicism all morning, basically telling his entire audience there's no point. What? Don't be happy about anything. If you're making plans to travel to Nevada, Canvas, then you should cancel. I'm not saying that at all.
Give up.
We can't
Nothing
take
will
anything
ever
for granted,
happen.
people.
Just insult Michael Bloomberg a
Black
little
pill
bit
Sam.
and sit back and wait to die.
Bang Bang Bart.
I don't find comedy funny anymore.
right.
Let me be an anecdote to Sam. Go out there and canvass. Bernie won Iowa and New Hampshire. He absolutely can. I think he will win. I definitely think we should make the convention about democratic legitimacy, and don't be black pilled by Sam.
Onward to Berlin, says Bang Bang Bart. Colin from Nebraska. Shout out to my friend Ryan. He told me he wants to pay attention more to politics, but is overwhelmed with the amount of information. I send him the AM Quickie, and he's been liking it a lot.
You can canvass if you want, but it
doubling.
all makes
you
no
wanna
difference.
waste your time.
If you want to, let me just say three things. One, I think Tom Perez is a nice guy. You should trust the DNC. Two, it's all hopeless. And three, just sit back and listen to the AM Quickie and wait for the tides to take us all.
A doubling of black support for Trump would be fatal for Dems in 2020. Yes, I agree.
And that will happen if you nominate Mike Bloomberg. I mean, I like honestly, like, or Pete Buttigieg for that matter.
Pickpocket Rick. Where can I get an MR mug? Soon. In our store, soon. A square. But Sam, that is the idea to get us all fatigued. Like Randy Rhoads used to say, in chaos they can steal, and I will add, lie, repeatedly propagandize hard, and continue to dismantle the so-called administrative state. You recall, I called in early January concerned about my fears of a fracture in the Democratic Party. We'll all need to be in the streets if the Democratic establishment stops Bernie or Minister Barr calls for general election investigators or goes to SCOTUS to get mad at King to stay in White House. Doe Link. Gabbard supports Donald J. Trump for dismissing Vindman. Yes. Senator Pug, I convinced my mom to caucus for Bernie in Nevada, and after New Hampshire, she donated to his campaign and signed up to volunteer. Nice.
Hell yeah.